Good afternoon, everyone. This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports. I'm recording. This is Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. I'm not really sure. It doesn't matter because we're getting ready for week 15 of the NFL season. We're talking DFS here today, both DraftKings and FanDuel. And hey, maybe you're somebody that's looking to jump into DFS because you just lost round one a season long. Maybe you're playing Lamar Jackson in the playoffs against him and you realize you're not going to win this week, so you want to jump into DFS. Or maybe you're somebody that's been playing DFS all season long. It doesn't matter. We're here talking about the core plays. We're trying to succeed. We're talking about those players that you can build your lineups around to make sure you succeed and are put in the best possible spot during week 15 DFS. DraftKings, FanDuel, all of it's covered here. Sit back, relax. We only have a couple weeks left of this stuff, so let's capitalize on what little time we have left and make sure we put together the best possible lineup this weekend. Yo, what's up everybody, and welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. As always, thank you for taking the time to find the channel, click on this video. It does mean a lot. It's been a great year so far. Let's keep it rolling with the little time we have left. We're talking week 15 core plays here. We really only have a couple weeks left of regular season here, especially for DFS. So we got to make sure we capitalize on that, put together our best lineup moving forward. Of course, if you're new here and you haven't checked it out already, I've published a video just yesterday. It's talking about the best matchups for week 15. Alongside of that, we also include full-blown spreadsheets, defense versus position spreadsheets, teams ranked 1 through 32, updated each and every week, and I throw in a couple other stats that are helpful. But again, tools, some spreadsheets that you can use absolutely free. All you got to do is check out the previous video, go down to the description, and there's a link so you can download all of that information. Again, absolutely free. You don't have to sign up for anything or provide an email. It's just a simple link to download. Finally, as always, thank you guys so much for supporting this channel. We've come a long way. This is our first full season of NFL, our first full real season of daily fantasy sports here on YouTube. We continue to grow the channel, add new subscribers each and every week. If you haven't done so already, make sure you are subscribed to the channel to catch all of our upcoming information. Publish videos for NFL each week. We're going to jump into baseball, my second favorite sport, come the spring. All of that information absolutely free to you guys. All you got to do just to support the channel, pretty simple. Make sure you're subscribed, like these videos if they're helping. With all of that said and out of the way, if you've been here before, you know the drill. We're going to talk about week 14. We're going to do a quick recap. All the plays I give out in my core play videos each and every week are guys that I fit into my lineups, I'm heavily invested in and own a ton of shares of. So let's look at week 14. Quick recap here, just to let you know, it was a pretty headache of a week for me. The typical tournament that I get in DraftKings, I didn't quite get into. It's a 150 max entry, so I just was scrambling around. I entered a ton of lineups, not all 150 that I had put together, which is really a shame. So this isn't exactly accurate because I didn't get in all 150 lineups. I was entering max entering 20 max tournaments, 10 max tournaments. I was just trying to fit guys in. I had a lot of repeat tournaments or repeat entries. It was just a very unorganized, disastrous type of entry for me this past weekend. Nonetheless, it was still an okay week for what I did get in. You can see here the guys I recommended are highlighted. Devontae Freeman, of course, chalkier player, absolutely went off. 45% owned on my part, did really well. Patrick Mahomes was my number one owned quarterback. He did very average, did get hurt, and that's kind of the theme here. A lot of these guys that are in red or didn't form well got hurt for me. Devontae Parker next up. Really loved Devontae Parker over the last weeks. Fortunately, he's in concussion protocol. We'll see if he plays this week, but that certainly hurt him last week. Ian Thomas, 37% owned, my highest owned tight end, absolutely went off for such a price. Aaron Jones, another guy, heavy running back I invested in, really went off, really good, I think multi-touchdown game for him, on fire on DraftKings. Then we have a series of bad plays here. Jack Doyle, Paris Campbell, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, all really bad. I blame Ryan Fitzpatrick's bad performance really on Devontae Parker. He has no one else to work with. So again, if you don't have Parker, then don't play Fitzpatrick. Powell here, he did okay. I think he had 10 or 11 points, but he was pretty much bare minimum on both sites, so that was an okay play there. Jamison Crowder, another guy that completely failed, just really not a good game for him. Did play a lot of Julian Edelman, actually only 15 lineups, so really not that much, but nonetheless, still, I recommended him. He did really well. Dalvin Cook didn't really fit a lot of him in, but still, an average play by any means there. Then we had Michael Thomas. I don't know how this happened. I think it was because of how messed up my entries were. Michael Thomas was my favorite wide receiver over Devontae Adams, and somehow I did not fit that much Michael Thomas in. I actually had more Devontae Adams. Nonetheless, Devontae Adams, recommended him as my number one wide receiver. Absolutely went off. Really enjoyed playing him in lineups last week. Beyond that, though, to really recap, I mentioned did not get in my full assortment of lineups, but those that I did get in, I had some really good ones. The quarterbacks that I recommended were really the other considerations. I did mention some of these guys. The Lamar Jackson lineup, 180 points really. Did really well for me. You can see I had a couple other Sam Darnold lineups lineups went off, Lamar Jackson, and then I had one Pat Mahomes lineup go off. I wouldn't say go off, but put up 106, kind of a low scoring week. Nonetheless, still, these are my top 5 lineups. Was a okay week considering I didn't really get into the tournaments I wanted to get into. Big lesson learned here for me. Make sure you reserve your entries if there's specific tournaments you want to get in. I think it was around 11 or 11:30. Tournament's usually still open. I unfortunately didn't get into that tournament I typically play in. But that recaps week 14. Let's jump right into week 15 here. I will tell you just generally my strategy this week. I'm getting a little bit weird. I've been doing, I would say, okay across the lineups I've been entering over the last few weeks. I will, I think, be switching to FanDuel this week. I have been playing almost exclusively DraftKings from the beginning of the season. I've meant to try to flip over to FanDuel, but I've been on kind of a little bit of a run on DraftKings, so I really haven't had an opportunity to do so. Nonetheless, this past week wasn't that great, like I mentioned, especially considering I didn't get to enter all my lineups in. So I think it's a good opportunity to switch over to FanDuel, see what I can do over there. Obviously, the strategy is different. It's half-point PPR, so you want to focus more on guys with touchdown upside versus maybe just guys with opportunity to catch the ball, for example. But I do have to warn, I am getting a little bit weird this week. There's a couple of guys that are chalky that I will be playing. On the flip side, there's a couple of guys that nobody's talking about that I think are in good spots to really capitalize on some tournament play. But first, guy, let's talk about quarterbacks here. I'm going Deshaun Watson for Houston. This isn't really a surprise. Avoided him last week, was doing really well until he really crushed with rushing touchdowns towards the end of that game that they were losing. Nonetheless, I'm going back to him this week for Houston. 6,800 on DraftKings, 8,200 on FanDuel. He's up there in terms of pricing, but quarterback pricing this week is very, very tight on both sites. What I like here is he's an away dog at Tennessee, 51.5 over under. He's a +3 in terms of a spread here, like I mentioned, an underdog. But this is a must-win game for both teams. This is a division game. They're going to play each other twice over the next 3 weeks. Basically, the loser of these games is not making playoffs, at least in my opinion. So again, there's a lot of motivation here for Deshaun Watson, for really Tennessee, everybody playing in this game. But if you focus on Watson here, he's really been on fire over his last few games. He's averaged 26 plus fantasy points per game over the last 3. He's utilizing his rushing ability more and more, especially in these more important games. He's had 13 rushes over the last 3 games. That includes a 6-rush, 44-yard, 2-touchdown performance last week versus Denver. And that's really where I'm going here this week. I'm trying to focus on guys that give you that floor because of their ability to rush the ball, but also have some elite style upside with both the ability to run and throw through the air. And really with Deshaun Watson, it's about not trying to get too cute here. Pricing is very tight, like I mentioned on both sites. You're talking about the 6,800 for Deshaun Watson on DraftKings. That's the number 4 priced quarterback versus same guy here, Kyler Murray, who's the number 20th priced quarterback, only about $1,000 cheaper. So pricing's tight. You really don't have to, or you're really not trying to save money. You're not doing that by jumping down the list. So I'm sticking with my main guy here, Deshaun Watson. Tennessee's a solid defense, but they've given up some big plays and big yards over the last few games. Over the last, I think, 3 or 4 games, you're talking about an average of 324 yards through the air against them. I like Deshaun Watson as an underdog playing in Tennessee, division game, big motivation here in week 15. Next up, I'm going with a guy that I don't think is going to be really highly owned. That's Kyler Murray for Arizona, 5,600 on DraftKings, 7,600 on FanDuel. Thing I love about him this week, and really I love in general about quarterbacks, guys that are home underdog. That is usually, especially with close spreads, you can see here he's a home underdog playing against Cleveland, 49.5 over under. So a solid, in terms of points being scored in that game, and it's a close spread. He's getting 3 points. Arizona's getting 3 at home. And if you want to get all fancy and nerdy here, there's actually a correlation, a strong correlation to this. You can Google this, you can look it up. It's been recorded. Guys have studied this between home underdog quarterbacks, close spread game, reaching kind of their ceiling. And that's exactly what we have here with Kyler Murray, one of the biggest reasons I like him. I did mention pricing tight, but playing Kyler Murray this week does save you a couple of dollars, about $1,000 versus someone like Deshaun Watson. But beyond that, he's also in a good spot playing against Cleveland, who have really faced pretty much no competition in terms of quarterbacks over the last few games. So their numbers might look good, but they really have faced no one. Kyler Murray offers that solid floor similar to Watson with his legs. You can really, I think you can expect around 5 rushes, anywhere from 25 to 30 rushing yards, with the upside of maybe 6-7 rushes and maybe 50-60 rushing yards and maybe a couple scores. He scored 4 times so far this year on the ground, so you got to like that. The one thing that you might worry about Kyler Murray, he hasn't played well, especially over the last couple of games, but my opinion here is he played some really tough defense, even at home. You're talking about Pittsburgh, the Los Angeles Rams, just some really solid defenses, and I don't think Cleveland comes anywhere close in terms of a defense similar to those teams. Really, Cleveland has played no one, like I mentioned, and they're missing currently their best pass rusher, so I think those numbers are going to come down. He shouldn't face much pressure, and beyond all of that, it's really tough to find quarterbacks this week that are in good weather situations. Kyler Murray's certainly in a good weather. He's playing at home. home in a dome. I like Kyler Murray this week, facing as an underdog at home versus Cleveland. Moving on to the running back position, first guy off the bat here, follow DFS. From anybody else, this isn't much of a surprise. A lot of people are on him. That's Chris Carson for Seattle. 7,500 on DraftKings, 7,400 on FanDuel. Much better value, I believe, on FanDuel, if my price is right there. I think it is. But really, it's pretty simple. He's certainly looking like a chalky play, but it's for good reason. He's in a smash spot, facing Carolina, and really their inept defense. They're really bad, especially against the run. The only downside here is that he is on the road. He's a little bit more of an expensive back, especially on DraftKings, but the matchup heavily in his favor, and he's a favored running back, even though he's on the road. Seattle is the favorite playing in Carolina. Carolina, though, like I mentioned, just an inept defense, especially against the run. They're the number one matchup for running back season in terms of defense versus position data, giving up 120 plus rushing yards a game, 28 to 30 fantasy points per game, depending on if you play PPR or half point PPR. They're giving up a league leading, and it's really not even close, 24 total touchdowns, rushing touchdowns on the ground, and they're allowing a league worst yard per carry clip at 5.3. So again, just all things point to a smash spot for Chris Carson. Even beyond that, though, it should be all him. They lost Rashard Penny last week, kind of eating into that. He's playing really, really well. Unfortunately, he got hurt. He's on the IR. So it's all Chris Carson. I think you're going to see similar numbers that you saw earlier this season from him in Seattle. I like him. It's an ideal matchup. Smash spot. Don't think twice about it, especially in cash. Play Carson. Next up here is Ezekiel Elliott for Dallas. 7,800 on DraftKings, 8,500 on FanDuel. Certainly a more expensive back than Chris Carson. And to be honest with you, I was kind of waiting between him and Saquon Barkley this week for this second spot here. I landed on Elliott for a couple of reasons. First, mainly because Barkley's projected as the number one owned running back for week 15. So I'm kind of going with the guy who's going to be lesser owned, that is arguably has the same upside, if not more, and is a safer play. Kind of those things all paint the picture that I like pretty much for the same price Elliott more than Barkley. Like I mentioned, he's had consistent, safe production and opportunity, especially over the last few games. Over his last 3 games, he's had 52 carries and 19 targets. He's also playing at home, which I don't have a lot of running backs here that are playing at home. I love that against the Rams. Albeit Dallas is an underdog, I still like always running backs playing on their home field. And look, it's really simple. We all know who Elliott is. The Los Angeles Rams might not be the most ideal on paper matchup for a running back, but if you look back to last week even, you saw Chris Carson in Seattle rush for over 100 yards against them at a 5.0 rushing yards per carry clip, and that was in Los Angeles. So certainly they can be beat on the ground. Zeke's obviously a big part of their offense. They're going to feed him the ball. You're going to see 15 to 20 carries, probably another 5 targets, maybe even more through the air. He has elite upside, safe floor. I like Elliott as my safe, expensive running back. And this next spot is where it really gets weird, and I'm taking a ton of risk. Completely know that. So certainly if this doesn't fit your bill, if you don't have a high tolerance for risk, you might want to ignore this. But I'm looking at David Montgomery for Chicago. Really cheap pricing on both sites. 5,500 on DraftKings, 6,400 on FanDuel. Certainly my biggest risk of the week. No one's talking about him. He's going to basically go unowned. Quite frankly, if you use projections, he's not projected to score a lot of points, especially considering other backs around his price. But there are reasons I like him this week. First and foremost, he's kind of the only true running back for Chicago right now. Yes, they do play Cohen a lot in passing situations, but if you look at actually game log, who's running the ball, it's all pretty much David Montgomery for Chicago right now. Played 64% of the snaps in week 14. That number 62% the prior 2 weeks. So again, he's getting the bulk majority of workload out of the backfield. And although he is playing on the road in Green Bay, that's what I want to see. I want to go with a running back versus Green Bay. That's how you beat them. Green Bay is currently giving up 112 rushing yards per game, anywhere from 24 to 28 fantasy points per game to running backs. That's top 5 in the NFL in terms of the weakest defenses or the best matchups, however you want to look at it. They're giving up 4.7 yards per carry. That's the 6th worst clip in the NFL. It's a snowy, bad weather game. You got to keep the ball on the ground most likely. Trubisky, I'm pretty sure they don't want him throwing the ball any more than he has. Again, you got to beat Green Bay through the ground, and I think David Montgomery is certainly that back that can certainly do that for them. His rushing yards continue to increase. I think over the last 3 weeks, you saw it go from 13, 16, 20 rushes per game. He's not going to get a ton of targets, but he's going to get 2 to 3 targets through the air. So you're talking about 20 to 25 attempts or opportunity against a very weak Green Bay team. Snowy weather. They're going to run the ball. I like David Montgomery as my sneaky play, but again, this is a super risk play. You could get 10 carries, 25 yards. They could get game scripted out. It's a risky play, but I do like David Montgomery for tournament. Finally, kind of the joke of all running backs right now, really a fantasy football DFS. Pay attention. That in-depth Twitter and all the different stuff. Patrick Laird from Miami, 4,500 DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Certainly, he's been a funny meme over the last couple of weeks, but he's a guy you can consider, especially at a value. This is really a pure value play here, especially on DraftKings where it's full PPR. This guy's gotten, he's getting used to, he's really the only available viable back for Miami right now. Played 82% of the snaps, 14. He had 15 carries, 5 targets. So really 20 opportunities, 85% of the snaps. A guy that's not coming off the field. So you're telling me you're going to get 20 opportunities versus the New York Giants defense. So I can't even remember his name. Scott, somebody averaged 5.0 yard per carry clip, got 10 rushes for 50 yards against them last week. It's Patrick Laird, but you got to like him. You got to like the opportunity versus a very weak defense. Solid play at a cheap price tag here, especially on DraftKings. All right, trying to speed things up here. I do apologize. I spent a little bit extra time on especially quarterbacks there, but let's just jump into wide receivers. Turn this up a little bit. Chris Godwin for Tampa Bay, probably the most expensive wide receiver I'm willing to pay up for this week. $7,700 on DraftKings, $8,400 on FanDuel. Not maybe in the most ideal matchup versus Detroit. Detroit's certainly not an elite defense by any means, but we know Tampa Bay. They throw the ball 50 times a game. I don't like Winston that much this week because of his injury to his hand, but I do like Godwin with Mike Evans being now ruled out basically for the rest of the year. Should see an uptick in volume and targets without Evans. We already know he gets 9, 10, 11 targets a game. We could see maybe now 12, 13, maybe even 15 targets on average per game for Chris Godwin in a high up-tempo, heavy volume pass game. I really like Chris Godwin. I think he's really safe, especially for cash games, especially on DraftKings where you get that full point PPR. He's averaging 21 and a half fantasy points per game currently, 9 targets per game. We should see those numbers increase a little bit. His price is up there, but I certainly think he can pay it off, especially with that high volume with Mike Evans being out. Next up here, it's pretty much the same deal. It's Kenny Golladay for Detroit, getting an uptick in volume, more opportunity, more targets, more volume with Marvin Jones Jr. going down with injury. He saves you a couple bucks over someone like Chris Godwin, $7,200 on DraftKings, $7,900 on FanDuel. He's in the number one. We're on the other side of the game here. Tampa Bay is the number one defense to a target with wide receivers right now, giving up a ridiculous amount of points, a ridiculous amount of yards through the air. Kenny Golladay with Jones Jr. out should see that increased volume, increased target share. He already gets, I think, he averages 7 or 8 targets per game. That could go to 10, 11, 12. He's done a lot over the last 3 games. I think he's had 20, 25 points on average per game over the last few games. And that's with David, I'm going to butcher his last name. I think it's David Blau or Blow. I don't know. The third string quarterback's in. Still getting an opportunity. I like Kenny Golladay as a mid-price guy on DraftKings and FanDuel. I will admit one of my favorite plays at wide receiver this week in week 15 is a guy that's mid-priced. That's Jarvis Landry for Cleveland. I talked about how much I really like Arizona, how much I like Kyler Murray, but I do like the other side of the ball here. Arizona plays that up-tempo, gives a lot of opportunity to opposing quarterbacks, opposing offenses. Jarvis Landry is the guy. I don't care about Odell Beckham. He has a hernia or whatever's going on. He has a bad attitude. I like Jarvis Landry. He's a hard-working receiver. He kind of gets that dirty work, catches the ball underneath, gets extra yards. $6,700 on DraftKings, $7,400 on FanDuel. Good pricing. Over the last 3 games, he's averaged over 10 targets a game. Clearly has developed a better repertoire or a better relationship with Baker Mayfield than Odell. So I trust him more than Odell. It's an elite, like I mentioned, fast-paced, good matchup versus Arizona. A top 5 matchup for wide receivers in terms of defense versus position. He's a good price, good matchup, playing on the road. They are favorites, but I think that's going to be a competitive, high-paced, high-scoring game. My favorite player on the Cleveland Browns side of the ball was Jarvis Landry. And kind of my value play this week is D.D. Westbrook for Jacksonville. Good price on both sites. But again, you're talking about a guy that's getting an uptick in volume, uptick in opportunity, uptick in target share percentage because of injury. DJ Chark's going to be out. So that's a good, it's not a good thing when somebody gets hurt, but it's a good thing for D.D. Westbrook. I think you can realistically expect around 10 targets for him. It's also a pretty good matchup. Oakland has been getting trashed this season, especially recently, both through the air and on the ground. If you look more specifically, Pro Football Focus has D.D. Westbrook as a top 5 matchup in terms of cornerback, wide receiver matchup, plus 22%. So all good things here. Good price, can pay off value here. Certainly a value player on the site. For tight ends this week, I'm keeping it very, very simple. Talking about 2 guys, basically repeats from the last few weeks. Tyler Higbee for the Rams, Ian Thomas for Carolina. Both these guys, especially on DraftKings, are super values. Tyler Higbee, I think he's really turned around. The reason why the Rams turned around is using him. He's a great blocker. He's an athletic tight end, better than Everett. Right now, I'm playing him as long as Everett's out. If they're going to mix it up, if Everett's coming back in, ignore this play. But right now, like I mentioned, the Rams are an improved offense with Higbee on the field. Over the last 2 weeks, pretty sure he leads tight ends, targets, yards, and fantasy points. He's had 19 targets over the last 2 games, 223 yards yards through the air. At that same time, that same span of period, he's had 42 plus fantasy points in PPR. So I do really like Tyler Higbee as a standalone tight end, especially with Everett out. He still appears to be out so far this week. Keep an eye on that. He remains an incredible value on DraftKings. But speaking of value, and this has kind of been the theme all season, play value players at tight end. I don't want to spend up at all at tight end. So I'm sticking with Ian Thomas for Carolina. He's averaging 13 plus fantasy points so far without Greg Olsen in the lineup. That number actually goes up a bit with Kyle Allen. Some of those games, of course, were Cam Newton. But with Kyle Allen and no Greg Olsen, you're looking at good numbers for Ian Thomas. Week 14, he played, obviously, 10 targets, 5 receptions, 57 yards, and a touchdown. Carolina, especially recently, has also favored tight ends. They're targeting tight ends in around 20% of the time, 20% target share. And Seattle's a good matchup. They're the number 2 in terms of fantasy points given up. If you're talking about defense versus position, giving up 13 to 17 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. But really, we're talking about $3,100 on DraftKings. So he's just a super value. He's going to get 8-10 targets maybe. You got to like that. I'm going with Ian Thomas for Carolina. And so that really wraps up the Week 15 core plays. Certainly getting weird in there a little bit. We talked about David Montgomery, some other plays that are just kind of off the wall. I'm talking about Elliott over Saquon Barkley. I think these are good plays. Again, I'm a tournament player, so take that with a grain of salt. The other guys, though, certainly I've mentioned if they're worthwhile for cash, but I do have some other considerations here. This is another weird play, but something I'm thinking about doing, and that's Russell Wilson for Seattle. Nobody's talking about him. Everybody is on Chris Carson. If you want to pivot off of that, if you want to try to take advantage of high ownership on Chris Carson, you could go with Russell Wilson. He's certainly not going to get owned. Stacking him with especially someone like Tyler Lockett, which is really scary. But DK Metcalf, there's certainly other guys you could stack him with. Russell Wilson has the capability just as much as anyone else. He could be Deshaun Watson. He could do all of that on the ground. He can throw the ball through the air. So again, if you really want to get nasty here, want to pivot off and try to go contrarian to the Chris Carson play, go with Russell Wilson. Another guy I want to point out here is Raheem. Hopefully I don't butcher this. Mostert for San Francisco. He seems to be the main back, or in terms of, I know they're splitting the ball a lot, but he seems to be the majority back here. He's getting most of the work. In a really good spot, San Francisco this week. They're huge favorites. I think the current line's at -11. So I do like him. I do like San Francisco's backfield in that matchup. Devontae Parker here, I have him asterisk. I love him. Every week I love him. And if he's going to play, I also like Ryan Fitzpatrick more. But I do like Devontae Parker. Just got a huge deal. Got an extension. Good for him. I do like Devontae Parker, but monitor his health. Speaking of that, let's go back real quick. Josh Jacobs for Oakland. He's in a smash spot, but I just can't imagine that they want to risk. He's a great player. He's a great running back, and they're going to put him in with a fractured shoulder. Maybe they are. Is he going to be limited? I don't know. But if he's out, go ahead and play his backup. I think that guy also is a smash spot. DJ Moore for Carolina. He's priced too low on FanDuel. I mentioned I'm going to be playing FanDuel more this week. He's a guy I'm going to be heavily invested in, but really just a FanDuel price tag play here for a guy that's getting a ton of targets, shows a ton of upside, one of the best receivers I think in the game right now. And Larry Fitzgerald for a guy to pair with, I guess, Kyler Murray. I mentioned him. I do like Larry Fitzgerald. Possibly a little bit of a narrative here. Might be his last home game. Good spot here, especially against that defense they're facing. So I do like Larry Fitzgerald to pair with Kyler Murray. And so that was a bit of a lengthy one. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure you give it a like. Let me know down in the comments below if I missed any guys, what you think of that David Montgomery play. A little bit crazy there, but I like to be different. I like to try to take chances. I hope you do too if you play tournaments. But again, leave me some comments down below of guys you're looking at, any stud players that I may have missed or spots that I might be overexposed to. I like to hear it all. We're a community here, and I do like when you guys leave comments. Of course, like I mentioned, if you haven't done so already, you want some extra information, check out the previous video about matchups. Click the link for the full spreadsheets. I'm giving you defense versus position data, completely updated, all linked in the description. Good information, help you guys succeed. And for those of you that are new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel. These videos are consistently put out each and every week. We've had a lot of good results. We're on a lot of players. We're a community here. We're trying to build this channel. The easiest way you can support No Huddle Fantasy Sports. There's no paywall. There's nothing you got to contribute other than make sure you give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. With all that being said, only got a couple weeks left here. Let's win some serious cash. Let's take down some of these tournaments. For people that are missing out on season long, let's get after it in DFS. As always, good luck. I hope to see you atop the leaderboards.